In the vibrant, fast-paced city of Chicago, where skyscrapers kiss the clouds and bustling streets hum with endless possibilities, the intersection of two vastly different worlds sets the stage for an unexpected story. Eleanor Brooks, a diligent and unassuming secretary with a penchant for staying under the radar, balances her modest life with the heavy responsibility of caring for her ailing mother. Across town, Ryan Harper, the reserved and enigmatic CEO of Nexus Innovations, commands a multi-million-dollar tech empire, but battles an inner loneliness buried beneath his confident exterior. Neither Eleanor nor Ryan could have foreseen that a single blind date, marked by a comical misunderstanding, would ignite a chain of events destined to change their lives forever. Mistakes, secrets, and unforeseen connections weave a tale of vulnerability, resilience, and love. As the backdrop of Chicago sets the stage for intrigue and ambition, these two unlikely souls embark on a journey that tests their strength and challenges their perceptions. And it all begins with a small cake, a French bulldog in a party hat, and a rooftop restaurant. The cool evening breeze danced over the rooftop of the summit, an exclusive restaurant perched atop one of Chicago's tallest skyscrapers. Fairy lights twinkled, soft jazz played in the background, and the city skyline shimmered like a jeweled tapestry. Eleanor Brooks clutched her purse tightly, her heels clicking against the polished tiles as she approached the host stand. "Reservation for Michael," she murmured, her voice almost drowned out by the lively chatter around her. The host scanned the list and gestured toward a table at the far end of the terrace. Eleanor, her heart pounding, reminded herself that Maddie's idea of a blind date wasn't entirely terrible. "Step out of your comfort zone," her friend had insisted, practically dragging her into the world of online matchmaking. It wasn't that Eleanor disliked the idea, it was just intimidating. Taking a deep breath, she spotted her supposed date, a tall man sitting alone at a table with a small, brightly colored cake in the center. The whimsical icing brought a smile to her face. What a sweet touch, she thought, her nerves settling as she approached. "Hi, you must be Michael," Eleanor said, sliding into the chair across from him with a smile. "And you even brought a cake. That's so thoughtful." The man looked up, his dark, piercing eyes locking with hers. There was a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by a neutral expression. He was strikingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and an air of quiet authority. Eleanor felt a flutter of uncertainty, but pushed through. "I can't believe you knew it was my birthday," she added, her gaze flickering to the cake. "Mind if I—" Without waiting for permission, she picked up the knife, sliced off a piece, and took a bold bite. The man leaned back slightly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "It's, delicious, isn't it?" he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of amusement. "It's amazing. Did you have it custom-made?" Eleanor asked, savoring the rich flavors. Before he could respond, another voice interrupted. "Mr. Harper, sorry for the delay." Bentley wouldn't sit still for the party hat, a man in a tailored suit said, walking toward them with a small French bulldog nestled in his arms. Eleanor froze mid-chew, her eyes darting between the dog and its comically tiny hat, the cake, and the man sitting across from her. The realization hit like a freight train. This wasn't Michael, and the cake wasn't for her. "Oh, my God," Eleanor's hand shot to her mouth as she stammered, I think I sat at the wrong table." The man, Ryan Harper, as the assistant had called him, couldn't hide his amusement any longer. His deep laugh resonated in the air as Eleanor scrambled to her feet, her face burning with mortification. "I'm so sorry," she said, clutching her purse. This is so embarrassing. Don't worry about it, Ryan interrupted smoothly, his gaze steady but warm. It happens. Hurrying away, Eleanor barely registered the hostess calling after her. She felt the weight of Ryan's eyes on her back as she retreated to the elevator. Her heart pounded in her chest, a whirlwind of embarrassment and disbelief clouding her thoughts. Meanwhile, Ryan Harper watched her leave, an intrigued smile lingering on his lips. "Derek," he said, glancing at his assistant. "Who was that?" "No idea, sir," Derek replied, still holding Bentley. "But she definitely left an impression." Ryan leaned back in his chair, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping the table. The evening hadn't gone as planned, but something about the bold, unapologetic woman who mistook his dog's birthday cake for her own had left a mark. The Monday morning sun bathed Chicago in golden light. But inside the headquarters of Nexus Innovations, the atmosphere was anything but serene. Employees bustled through the sleek, modern corridors of the tech giant, clutching files and tapping away at their tablets. Whispers floated from cubicle to cubicle. Today was the day the company's new CEO was set to take the reins. Eleanor Brooks, buried in a mountain of reports, hardly paid attention to the buzz. She had enough on her plate with an upcoming marketing campaign deadline, her mother's latest round of treatments, and a personal vow to avoid any more blind dates, especially ones that ended in public humiliation. "Eleanor, did you hear?" Maddie's voice interrupted her focus. Maddie, her ever-energetic friend, leaned against Eleanor's desk, her expression alight with curiosity. "Hear what?" Eleanor asked without looking up from her spreadsheet. "The new CEO. Rumor has it he's a big shot, a tech genius who's probably swimming in money and charisma." Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Sounds like half the CEOs in Chicago. Except this one is single. Can you imagine? Rich, brilliant, and possibly good-looking. The trifecta." Maddie smirked. "Maybe you should—" "No." Eleanor's response was firm. "I've had my fill of CEOs for one lifetime." Maddie laughed, oblivious to Eleanor's discomfort. "Fair enough, but you might want to keep an eye out. Word is, he's a perfectionist, and you know how those types can be." Eleanor sighed, returning her focus to her work. Nexus was a demanding environment, and the arrival of a new boss was the last thing she needed to worry about. At precisely 9 a.m., the soft chime of the elevator echoed through the office. Heads turned as the doors slid open, revealing a tall man in a tailored suit. Ryan Harper stepped out with an air of quiet authority, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Beside him was Derek, his ever-efficient assistant, carrying a sleek briefcase. Eleanor, balancing a precarious stack of documents, walked directly toward the elevator without glancing up. The two collided gently, the impact sending a folder tumbling from her pile. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Eleanor stammered, crouching to retrieve the papers. She glanced up, her breath catching, as her eyes met Ryan's. It took a split second for recognition to flicker in Ryan's eyes, though his expression remained impassive. "No harm done," he said, his voice calm. Eleanor's cheeks flushed as she realized who he was. The man from the rooftop, the one whose dog's cake she had stolen. But how? Why was he here? Straightening, she forced a polite smile and stepped aside. "Welcome to Nexus, sir." Ryan gave a small nod, the corner of his mouth twitching, as though he were suppressing a smile. "Thank you." Without another word, he continued toward the conference room, Derek following closely behind. Eleanor stood frozen, her mind racing. Of all the people in Chicago. Inside the conference room, Ryan settled into his new role with ease. As he addressed the department heads, laying out his vision for Nexus, his thoughts kept drifting back to Eleanor. The sheer coincidence of encountering her again was almost too much to believe. And yet there she was, brilliant, composed, and utterly unaware of the effect she had left on him that night. "Sir, would you like to review the employee profiles?" Derek asked, sliding a folder across the table. "Later," Ryan replied, his tone clipped. His curiosity about Eleanor was growing, and he knew he couldn't leave it unaddressed for long. Meanwhile, the rest of the office was abuzz with speculation. Eleanor's brief encounter with Ryan hadn't gone unnoticed, and whispers quickly spread about the new CEO's interest in her. "Did you see the way he looked at her?" one colleague whispered near the coffee machine. "They barely spoke," another replied. "But there was definitely something there." Eleanor tried to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on her work. But as the day wore on, she couldn't shake the lingering tension. Ryan Harper, her accidental blind date, was now her boss, and she had no idea how to navigate this new reality. Late in the afternoon, Eleanor found herself summoned to the HR department. She arrived to find a polished, no-nonsense woman named Rachel waiting for her. "Miss Brooks, congratulations," Rachel said with a professional smile. "You've been selected as Mr. Harper's executive assistant." Eleanor blinked, stunned. I don't understand. I didn't apply for this position." Rachel's smile didn't waver. "Mr. Harper personally reviewed the candidates and requested you specifically. It's a significant promotion with a competitive salary increase. Of course, you're free to decline, but—" "No," Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. "I'll accept." As she left the HR office, Eleanor's mind swirled with questions. Why had Ryan chosen her? Was it coincidence, or did he remember her from the rooftop? Either way, she couldn't afford to let her emotions interfere. Her mother's medical bills loomed large, and this promotion could be the solution she desperately needed. Back in his office, Ryan leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. Eleanor Brooks intrigued him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her confidence at the restaurant, her poise in the office. She was unlike anyone he'd met. "She accepted the position," Derek informed him, stepping into the room. "Good," Ryan replied. "I look forward to working with her." And so their professional relationship began, setting the stage for a collision of ambitions, misunderstandings, and undeniable chemistry. The transition from an ordinary employee to the executive assistant of Nexus Innovations' enigmatic new CEO happened almost overnight for Eleanor Brooks. One moment, she was managing mundane tasks in her department. The next, she was sitting at a sleek desk outside Ryan Harper's office, surrounded by an air of exclusivity. The change was dizzying, and Eleanor couldn't shake the nagging question, "Why me?" The first morning in her new role began quietly. Eleanor arrived early, determined to make a good impression. Her new workspace gleamed with pristine organization, minimalist decor, neatly aligned office supplies, and a state-of-the-art computer setup. She double-checked her planner, mentally preparing for what she assumed would be a demanding day. The elevator chimed, and Eleanor glanced up to see Ryan stepping into the office. His crisp navy suit and confident stride were hard to ignore, but she forced herself to focus on her task. "Good morning, Miss Brooks," Ryan greeted, his tone professional yet warm. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," she replied, standing briefly as he passed her desk. Ryan paused at his door, turning slightly. "Set up a meeting with the heads of R&D for 10 a.m. And let's schedule time to review the quarterly reports later this afternoon." "Of course, sir," Eleanor said, noting his requests in her planner. She kept her tone neutral, avoiding his gaze. Ryan disappeared into his office, leaving Eleanor to exhale the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The memory of their chance meeting at the restaurant lingered at the edges of her mind. She couldn't let that encounter cloud her judgment or her professionalism, not when so much was at stake. By mid-morning, Eleanor was immersed in the nuances of her new role. From coordinating meetings to managing Ryan's extensive schedule, she found herself navigating a whirlwind of responsibilities. Despite the challenge, she welcomed the distraction. It was better than dwelling on the uncertainty of her relationship with Ryan or her growing sense of unease about his motives. As the day progressed, Eleanor began noticing subtle dynamics in Ryan's interactions. Though his demeanor was composed and commanding, he occasionally glanced at her with an intensity that left her unsettled. His questions during meetings often sought her input, and his quiet observations seemed focused on her reactions. During a break, Maddie called, her voice full of curiosity. "How's the new job? Or should I say, how's working with him?" Eleanor sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's fine. Busy. Professional." "Professional? Eleanor, this is the same guy whose dog's cake you ate. How can you even look him in the eye?" "I don't have a choice," Eleanor replied, her voice tinged with exasperation. "Besides, it's not like he's brought it up." Maybe he's saving it for the perfect moment," Maddie teased. "Or maybe he's trying to figure you out." Eleanor didn't respond, unwilling to admit that Maddie's words struck a nerve. Later that afternoon, Eleanor joined Ryan in his office to review the quarterly reports. His workspace was a reflection of his personality, sleek, minimalist, and meticulously organized. As she presented her findings, Ryan listened intently, his piercing gaze never leaving her. "You've got a sharp eye for detail," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's not something I see often." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, keeping her tone measured. "Why didn't you apply for this position?" Ryan asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "I didn't think it was within my reach," she admitted. "I was focused on my current role." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes someone else to see your potential. Don't underestimate yourself, Miss Brooks." Eleanor felt a flicker of appreciation for his words, though she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his decision than he let on. The following day brought its own set of challenges. Eleanor accompanied Ryan to a high-profile meeting with investors, her first real test in the role. The conference room was filled with power players, and the weight of expectation hung heavy in the air. As the meeting progressed, a technical glitch threatened to derail the presentation. Eleanor acted quickly, stepping in to troubleshoot the issue, while Ryan continued fielding questions with ease. Her swift intervention drew nods of approval from the attendees. On the drive back to the office, Ryan broke the silence. "You handled that well." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. "You're more than capable of handling this role. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise," he added, his tone sincere. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised by the compliment. She realized that behind his composed exterior, Ryan was carefully observing and evaluating her, not just as an employee, but as a person. That evening, Eleanor found herself reflecting on her new reality. The promotion had provided a much-needed boost to her income, enabling her to better support her mother's medical care. But it had also placed her in close proximity to a man whose intentions she couldn't quite decipher. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. "Maddie, so, did he stare at you all day?" Eleanor rolled her eyes, typing a quick response. "Eleanor, no, he's just focused." "Maddie, focused on you maybe. Don't overthink it. Just see where it goes." Eleanor set her phone down, Maddie's words echoing in her mind. She knew she couldn't afford distractions, not when her career and her mother's health depended on her staying focused. But as she drifted off to sleep, a small part of her couldn't ignore the growing intrigue surrounding Ryan Harper. Ryan, meanwhile, sat in his penthouse apartment, nursing a glass of bourbon as he stared out over the city. He couldn't shake the memory of Eleanor's determined expression during the meeting or the quiet confidence she exuded in moments of pressure. She was unlike anyone he'd worked with before, and he found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. But he also knew the risks. Ryan had built his career on control and precision, and letting someone in, especially someone as unpredictable as Eleanor, was a gamble. Still, he couldn't deny the growing connection between them. As he set his glass down, Ryan made a silent vow. Whatever the future held, he would protect Eleanor's trust at all costs, even if it meant confronting his own vulnerabilities. Eleanor Brooks found herself navigating unfamiliar territory in her new role as executive assistant. The days were fast-paced, the demands high, and the expectations even higher. But beneath the professional rigor, an unspoken tension simmered between her and Ryan Harper. It was a subtle push and pull, quiet exchanges, lingering glances, and a rhythm that neither of them could ignore. The day began with an air of urgency. Ryan called Eleanor into his office first thing in the morning, his tone brisk and businesslike. "Miss Brooks, we've got a meeting with the board of directors in an hour," he said, scanning through his tablet. "I'll need you to review these slides and ensure all supporting documents are ready." "Understood, Mr. Harper," Eleanor replied, taking the tablet and exiting swiftly. Eleanor dove into the task, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she double-checked figures and formatting. The meeting loomed, and she knew this would be a pivotal moment, not just for the company, but for her standing in her new role. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with authority. Executives lined the table, their polished suits and calculating gazes a reminder of the stakes. Ryan entered confidently, commanding the room with his presence, and Eleanor followed with a composed demeanor, carrying a stack of meticulously prepared reports. As the presentation began, Eleanor took her seat at the side, observing Ryan's performance. He was eloquent, concise, and utterly in control. But midway through, the projector screen flickered, and the slides froze. A murmur rippled through the room. Eleanor's instincts kicked in. Rising quickly, she approached the laptop controlling the presentation, her fingers moving deftly to troubleshoot the issue. Within moments, the slides reappeared, and the room settled. Ryan paused, glancing at her with a flicker of approval, before continuing his pitch. Eleanor returned to her seat, her heart racing, but her expression calm. When the meeting concluded, the directors offered their thanks and praise for the seamless recovery. Ryan turned to Eleanor as they exited. "Well done," he said simply, his voice carrying a note of genuine appreciation. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, her professionalism masking the satisfaction she felt. Later that afternoon, Ryan invited Eleanor to lunch. She hesitated for a moment, but knew refusing wasn't an option. They walked to a nearby cafe, its cozy interior a contrast to the sleek, high-pressure environment of Nexus Innovations. As they sat down, Ryan broke the silence. "You handled yourself well today." "It's part of the job," Eleanor said modestly. "Not everyone would have stayed as calm under pressure," he countered. "You're impressive." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Harper." "Ryan," he corrected. "Let's drop the formalities, at least outside the office." She hesitated before nodding. "All right, Ryan." Their conversation took an unexpected turn as they delved into personal topics. Ryan spoke of his childhood, a life of privilege marked by loneliness. "Success isn't as fulfilling when you don't have anyone to share it with," he admitted, his tone reflective. Eleanor, in turn, shared her struggles with balancing work and caring for her mother. "It's not easy, but my mom is everything to me. She worked so hard to give me a good life. Supporting her now is the least I can do." Ryan listened intently, his usual guarded demeanor softening. For the first time, Eleanor felt like she was speaking to the man behind the title, not just the CEO. The following days saw a shift in their interactions. Ryan seemed more approachable, and Eleanor found herself less guarded. Their professional dynamic remained intact, but moments of levity began to creep in. One evening, as Eleanor prepared to leave the office, Ryan appeared at her desk. "Miss Brooks," he began, then caught himself. "Eleanor, I was impressed with how you handled the board meeting. You've exceeded my expectations." "Thank you, Ryan," she replied, her lips curving into a small smile. "By the way, I'll need your assistance at a gala this weekend. It's a corporate event, but your presence will be valuable." "A gala?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Yes, it's an opportunity to connect with potential partners. I trust you'll handle it well." Eleanor nodded, though the thought of attending such an event made her stomach flutter. "I'll be there." That weekend, Maddie came to Eleanor's apartment, eager to help her prepare for the gala. "This is your chance to make a statement," Maddie said, holding up a sleek navy dress. "You'll look stunning in this." Eleanor laughed nervously. "It's just a work event." "Work event, my foot. This is about showing Mr. CEO that you're not just his assistant. You're a force to be reckoned with." Eleanor reluctantly agreed, slipping into the dress and allowing Maddie to style her hair. When she arrived at the gala, the grand ballroom was already buzzing with activity. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests, and soft classical music filled the air. Ryan was waiting near the entrance, his sharp suit emphasizing his commanding presence. When he saw Eleanor, his expression briefly flickered, with something she couldn't quite place. Admiration? Surprise? "You look incredible," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you," she replied, taking it hesitantly. The evening was a whirlwind of introductions and conversations. Eleanor observed Ryan in his element, his charisma captivating every audience. But she also noticed how often his attention drifted to her, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. At one point, Ryan introduced Eleanor to a potential investor. "This is Eleanor Brooks, my executive assistant. She's been instrumental in our recent successes." The investor, an older gentleman, smiled warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet someone who has such a positive impact." Eleanor thanked him, her confidence bolstered by Ryan's acknowledgement. As the gala drew to a close, Ryan escorted Eleanor to her car. The night air was crisp, and a comfortable silence hung between them. "You handled yourself beautifully tonight," Ryan said, as they reached her vehicle. "It's part of the job," she replied with a teasing smile, echoing her earlier words. Ryan chuckled. "You keep saying that, but you're more than your job, Eleanor." She looked at him, searching for the meaning behind his words, but before she could respond, he stepped back. "Get home safe." Eleanor nodded, slipping into the car. As she drove away, her thoughts swirled with questions and emotions she wasn't ready to confront. The week leading up to the gala passed in a blur for Eleanor. Balancing her demanding workload with preparations for the upcoming event left her little time to dwell on her mounting nerves. Ryan Harper had made it clear that her presence was more than a formality. She would be his support during critical conversations with potential partners. But what unsettled her most was his unspoken expectation that she stand by his side throughout the evening. The day of the gala arrived, and Eleanor was once again at the mercy of Maddie. who was thrilled at the chance to style her friend. "This dress is going to knock him off his feet," Maddie declared, holding up an elegant emerald green gown with a plunging neckline and a flowing train. "Trust me, Eleanor. Subtle but stunning. It's exactly your vibe." "Maddie, I don't think I want to stand out too much," Eleanor said, eyeing the dress nervously. "Sweetie, you're not standing out. You're owning the room." "There's a difference," Maddie retorted with a wink. After hours of prep that included hair, makeup, and a healthy dose of Maddie's relentless pep talk, Eleanor finally looked in the mirror. The transformation startled her. The woman staring back exuded confidence, a stark contrast to the hesitant secretary she usually saw. "You look incredible," Maddie said, beaming. "Now, go show them who Eleanor Brooks really is." When Eleanor arrived at the grand venue, her breath caught in her throat. The ballroom was a masterpiece of opulence. Golden chandeliers glittered overhead, tables were adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, and the air was filled with the soft strains of a live string quartet. Ryan stood near the entrance, dressed in a classic black tuxedo that only accentuated his striking features. As Eleanor approached, his gaze locked onto her, and for a fleeting moment his composed demeanor faltered. "Eleanor," he said, his voice softer than usual, "you look, stunning." "Thank you," she replied, a shy smile playing on her lips. "You clean up pretty well yourself." A small smirk tugged at the corner of Ryan's mouth. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and Eleanor hesitated for only a second before taking it. The night unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. Ryan introduced Eleanor to a series of influential figures, seamlessly navigating conversations while subtly highlighting her contributions to Nexus innovations. "This is Eleanor Brooks," he said to a potential investor. "She's not just my executive assistant. She's been a driving force behind several key projects." Eleanor smiled politely, though her cheeks flushed with pride. She couldn't ignore the way Ryan's words carried weight, as though he was deliberately ensuring everyone understood her value. As the evening progressed, Eleanor began to feel more at ease. The initial intimidation of the grand event gave way to a quiet confidence, as she realized she could hold her own among the elite. However, her comfort was short-lived. Vanessa Moore, Ryan's ex-girlfriend and a well-known socialite, made her entrance in a gown that seemed designed to command attention. Her sharp eyes immediately zeroed in on Ryan and Eleanor. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Vanessa said, her tone dripping with feigned sweetness as she approached. "Ryan, I didn't expect to see you here. And with company, no less." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Vanessa, Eleanor Brooks, this is Vanessa Moore." "Pleasure to meet you," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite Vanessa's piercing gaze. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "So, Eleanor, how long have you been working for Ryan? Or should I say, with Ryan?" She emphasized the word with, her insinuation clear. Eleanor met Vanessa's gaze head-on. "Long enough to know that he surrounds himself with capable and dedicated people." Ryan's lips quirked in a subtle smile at Eleanor's poised response, but Vanessa wasn't finished. "How charming," Vanessa said, her voice laced with condescension. "I hope you know what you're getting into, dear. Ryan has a way of keeping people on their toes." Before Eleanor could reply, Ryan stepped in. "Vanessa, if you'll excuse us, Eleanor and I have some important matters to discuss." He placed a firm hand on Eleanor's back and guided her away, his touch both protective and grounding. They found a quieter corner of the ballroom, where Ryan turned to Eleanor with a rare look of apology. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "Vanessa can be Difficult. Eleanor shook her head. I can handle it. She doesn't intimidate me. Ryan's expression softened. I don't doubt that. Their moment was interrupted by the MC, announcing the start of the evening's formal presentations. Ryan and Eleanor returned to the main area, where he delivered a speech that captivated the audience. Eleanor stood nearby, observing him with a newfound admiration. For all his complexities, Ryan was undeniably compelling. As the night wound down, Ryan escorted Eleanor to her car. The city lights cast a soft glow, and the air was filled with a quiet hum of life. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thank you for tonight, Ryan said finally, his voice low. You were remarkable. I was just doing my job, Eleanor replied with a teasing smile. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. It's more than that. You have a way of making things better. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat at the sincerity in his tone, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. Good night, Ryan. Good night, Eleanor, he said, his gaze lingering as she stepped into her car. Later that night, Eleanor replayed the evening's events in her mind. Despite Vanessa's antics and the intimidating atmosphere, she realized something important. She was capable of holding her own in Ryan Harper's world. And as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. Meanwhile, Ryan sat in his penthouse, nursing a glass of bourbon as he stared out at the city skyline. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing stood out with crystal clarity. Eleanor Brooks was unlike anyone he'd ever met. The city was unusually quiet, as Ryan Harper's sleek black sedan pulled up in front of Eleanor's modest apartment building. She hesitated for a moment before unbuckling her seatbelt, still trying to shake off the intensity of the evening. The gala had been an emotional roller coaster, and now, as Ryan walked around to open her door, she couldn't help but feel a swirl of confusion and gratitude. You don't have to walk me to the door, she said, trying to maintain her usual independence. Ryan ignored her protest, offering his hand as she stepped out of the car. Humor me, he replied, his voice laced with a mixture of playfulness and sincerity. As they approached the building, Eleanor's heel caught on a crack in the pavement. She stumbled, letting out a startled gasp. Before she could hit the ground, Ryan's arms were around her, steadying her effortlessly. Are you okay? He asked, his brows furrowing in concern, as he helped her regain her balance. Eleanor winced, clutching her ankle. I think I twisted it. It's not bad. I'll be fine. Ryan, however, was already crouching down to inspect her injury. You can barely stand on it. Come on. Ryan, I said I'm fine. But her protest was cut short as he scooped her up into his arms, carrying her toward the door with ease. Eleanor's face burned with embarrassment as Ryan carried her up the stairs, ignoring her half-hearted objections. When they reached her apartment, she fumbled with her keys, finally managing to unlock the door. Ryan stepped inside, carefully setting her down on the couch. Do you have ice? He asked, glancing around the cozy space. The apartment was small but warm, with framed photos of her mother on the walls and a stack of books on the coffee table. In the freezer, Eleanor replied, still too flustered to argue. She watched as Ryan moved with purpose, retrieving a towel and an ice pack before kneeling in front of her. You really didn't have to do all this, she said, as he gently applied the ice to her ankle. Ryan's expression softened. Eleanor, you work harder than anyone I know. The least I can do is make sure you're okay. She looked away, unsure how to respond. His care felt genuine, and that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. As they sat in silence, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall filled the room. Finally, Eleanor spoke. her voice quiet. "Thank you for everything tonight. I know you didn't have to go out of your way for me." Ryan met her gaze, his blue eyes steady. "You're worth going out of my way for." Her breath caught at the intensity in his tone, but before she could overthink it, she shifted the conversation. "I should probably call my mom. She'll want to know how the gala went." Ryan's expression softened further at the mention of her mother. "How is Margaret doing?" Eleanor hesitated, the weight of her mother's health always lingering in the back of her mind. "She's stable, but it's hard. She's always been so strong. And now—" She trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "If there's anything I can do, Eleanor, anything at all, you just have to ask." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his words, but she quickly masked her emotions. "Thank you, Ryan. Really." Over the next few weeks, Ryan's presence in Eleanor's life became both a comfort and a complication. He started accompanying her on hospital visits, his calm demeanor earning Margaret's approval almost immediately. "You must be Ryan," Margaret said during their first meeting, her frail hands reaching out to him. "Eleanor's told me so much about you." Ryan glanced at Eleanor, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Has she?" he asked, taking Margaret's hand gently. Eleanor flushed, quickly changing the subject. "Mom, Ryan just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." "Well, you're a good man for taking care of my daughter," Margaret said, her voice warm despite her weakened state. "She's always been so independent, but even the strongest people need someone to lean on." Eleanor shot Ryan a warning glance, but he only smiled, clearly enjoying her discomfort. Their dynamic continued to shift as they spent more time together. Despite Eleanor's best efforts to maintain a professional boundary, the lines between their personal and work lives began to blur. Ryan's protectiveness grew more evident, and Eleanor found herself relying on him in ways she hadn't anticipated. One evening, after a long day at the office, Ryan approached her desk. "Eleanor, I was thinking, how about dinner? My treat." She looked up, surprised. "Dinner? To discuss the upcoming presentation," he added, though the glint in his eyes suggested otherwise. Eleanor hesitated, but eventually nodded. "All right, but strictly work talk." "Strictly work," Ryan agreed, though his smirk hinted at the unlikelihood of that promise. The restaurant he chose was intimate, with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. As they reviewed their notes, the conversation inevitably drifted to more personal topics. "Do you ever stop working?" Eleanor asked, her tone teasing but genuine. Ryan leaned back in his chair, a rare smile gracing his lips. "Not often, but lately I've found a reason to slow down." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat at the way he looked at her, but she quickly shifted her focus back to her notes. "Well, maybe you should take your own advice once in a while." "I'll consider it," he said, his smile widening. By the time Ryan dropped her off at her apartment, the tension between them was palpable. As she stepped out of the car, she turned to thank him, but before she could speak, he reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "Good night, Ryan," she replied, her pulse racing as she walked inside. That night, as Eleanor lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was becoming increasingly intertwined with Ryan's. What had started as a professional relationship was evolving into something far more complicated and far more meaningful. Ryan, meanwhile, sat in his penthouse, a glass of bourbon in hand, as he stared out at the city lights. For the first time in years, he felt a connection he couldn't ignore, and as much as it scared him, he wasn't ready to let it go. The soft hum of the hospital monitors filled the quiet room as Eleanor adjusted her mother's blanket. Margaret, now visibly more fragile than the vibrant woman Eleanor remembered from her childhood, smiled weakly at her daughter. "Eleanor," Margaret said, her voice soft but clear, "when are you going to tell me more about Ryan?" Eleanor froze, her hand hovering above the blanket. "What do you mean?" she asked, feigning ignorance. Margaret's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Don't think I don't notice how often he comes by. He's charming, attentive, and he looks at you like you're the only person in the room." Eleanor felt her cheeks heat up. "Mom, it's now I like that. Ryan's just helping out while you're in the hospital. He's my boss, remember?" Margaret raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Boss or not, he seems to care about you. A lot." Before Eleanor could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Ryan stepped in, carrying a bouquet of fresh lilies. He smiled warmly at Margaret, the sight of him instantly brightening the room. "Good afternoon, Margaret. How are we feeling today?" he asked, setting the flowers on the bedside table. Margaret's expression softened. "Better now that you're here, Ryan? You're spoiling me with all these visits." "Only the best for Eleanor's mother," Ryan replied smoothly, glancing at Eleanor, whose face was a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. As the weeks passed, Ryan's visits became a regular occurrence. He would bring Margaret her favorite books, stay for tea, and even accompany Eleanor to doctor consultations. Their shared moments at the hospital began to blur the lines between their professional arrangement and something more personal. One evening, after leaving the hospital, Ryan suggested they grab dinner. "You've been running yourself ragged, Eleanor. Let me treat you to something other than hospital cafeteria food." Eleanor hesitated, but eventually nodded. "All right, but no work talk, okay?" "Deal," Ryan said, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The restaurant he chose was a quaint Italian bistro, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The candlelit ambiance and soft music made Eleanor feel more at ease than she had in weeks. As they shared a plate of pasta and talked about everything from childhood memories to future aspirations, Eleanor found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. "I never wanted to depend on anyone," she admitted, twirling her fork in the remaining strands of spaghetti. "My mom taught me to stand on my own 2 feet, no matter how hard things got." Ryan nodded, his gaze steady. "And yet, sometimes standing alone can be the hardest thing to do. It's okay to let people in, Eleanor." His words lingered in her mind as they left the restaurant. When Ryan dropped her off at her apartment, he walked her to the door as usual. But this time, as she turned to thank him, his hand brushed against hers. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and full of meaning. "Good night, Ryan," she replied, her heart pounding as she stepped inside. The next day at work, their dynamic shifted further. Ryan assigned Eleanor to accompany him to a series of client meetings, citing the need for her input on key presentations. While Eleanor remained professional, she couldn't ignore the way his gaze lingered on her a little longer than usual, or how his tone softened when addressing her. Their colleagues began to notice too. Maddie, always the observant friend, cornered Eleanor in the break room. "Okay, spill. What's going on with you and Mr. Harper?" "Nothing's going on," Eleanor replied quickly, avoiding Maddie's knowing grin. "Uh-huh, sure. And I'm the Queen of England, Eleanor. The man is practically glued to your side. Are you seriously going to tell me there's nothing there?" Eleanor sighed, leaning against the counter. "It's complicated, Maddie. He's my boss, and he's been helping me with my mom. That's all." "Helping you, huh? With flowers, hospital visits, and those lingering looks." Maddie teased. Face it, Eleanor. The man's smitten. Meanwhile, Ryan wrestled with his own feelings. He found himself seeking out Eleanor's company, not just for work, but for the comfort and ease she brought into his life. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, he asked her to join him for a drink at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. I don't usually mix work with personal matters, Ryan admitted, swirling his glass of scotch. But with you, it feels different. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised by his vulnerability. Different how? He hesitated, searching for the right words. Like I can be myself. No expectations, no pretense. Just real. The honesty in his voice took Eleanor off guard, but she found herself smiling. You're not so bad when you're real. Their closeness didn't go unnoticed by others. Vanessa Moore, Ryan's ex-girlfriend, caught wind of their growing bond and decided to insert herself into the picture. She showed up unannounced at Ryan's office, her polished exterior masking her true intentions. Ryan, Vanessa purred, leaning against his desk. It's been too long. We should catch up. Ryan's expression hardened. Vanessa, I'm busy. Too busy for an old friend, she asked, feigning innocence. Her gaze shifted toward Eleanor, who had just walked in with a stack of reports. Oh, I see. You've moved on. How quaint. Eleanor's cheeks flushed, but she maintained her composure. I'll come back later, she said, turning to leave. Stay, Ryan said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned back to Vanessa. Whatever you're here for, Vanessa. I'm not interested. Please leave. Vanessa's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. Fine. But don't forget, Ryan. You can't replace the past so easily. As she walked out, Eleanor glanced at Ryan. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he replied, his voice steady. You don't deserve her pettiness, Eleanor. And I'm not letting her drag me back into her games. The encounter only deepened Ryan and Eleanor's connection. That night, as Eleanor sat in her apartment reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized how much Ryan had come to mean to her. What had started as a professional arrangement had evolved into something far more profound, something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but couldn't deny any longer. The sharp winter breeze swirled through Chicago's downtown streets as Eleanor briskly exited the office, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. It had been a long day of back-to-back meetings, and all she wanted was to get home, to a warm cup of tea. But as she turned the corner toward her usual bus stop, two men emerged from the shadows. Eleanor Clark, one of them said, his voice cold and deliberate. He was tall with a weathered face, the kind of man whose presence demanded attention. His partner, shorter but equally menacing, stepped closer, blocking her path. Eleanor's breath hitched, but she kept her composure. What do you want? She asked, clutching her bag tightly. You know what we want, the taller man replied. Your little extensions are running out, and our patience is too. The mention of her overdue debt sent a jolt of anxiety through Eleanor. These men were loan sharks, people she had reluctantly turned to when her mother's medical bills piled too high. She had no other choice at the time, but now the weight of their threats was becoming unbearable. Please, Eleanor said, her voice steady but pleading. I just need a little more time. I'm working hard to pay you back. The shorter man scoffed. Time isn't free, Miss Clark. You know the deal. If we don't get our money soon, you'll regret it. Their words felt like a noose tightening around her neck, but Eleanor refused to let them see her fear. I'll have the money soon. Just give me until the end of the month. The taller man exchanged a glance with his partner before nodding slowly. You've got 2 weeks. No more extensions. Without another word, The men disappeared into the night, leaving Eleanor shaken, but determined. She couldn't let this overshadow her progress, not when she was finally starting to regain control of her life. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, Ryan had been standing a few feet away, hidden by the shadows of a nearby alley. He had just left the office himself when he spotted her talking to the men. The tension in their body language and the unease on Eleanor's face told him something was wrong. Curiosity piqued, Ryan followed the men discreetly, keeping his distance until they entered a rundown bar. He stopped outside, the wheels in his mind turning. Were they threatening Eleanor? Why? And why hadn't she told him about it? The encounter left him conflicted. On one hand, he couldn't ignore the growing sense of protectiveness he felt toward Eleanor. On the other, doubts began to creep in. Was she hiding something from him? Was her involvement with him more calculated than he had thought? The next morning, Ryan arrived at the office with an unusually serious expression. He passed Eleanor's desk without a word, heading straight to his office. Eleanor noticed his cold demeanor and frowned. Had she done something wrong? Throughout the day, Ryan's distance became more apparent. He spoke to Eleanor only when necessary, his tone curt and formal. The change in his behavior unsettled her, but she couldn't figure out what had caused it. During their lunch break, Eleanor confided in Maddie. Something's off with Ryan. He's been different today. Distant. Maddie raised an eyebrow. Did something happen between you two? Not that I know of, Eleanor replied, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. I just feel like he's shutting me out, and I don't understand why. Maybe he's stressed, Maddie suggested. He's a CEO after all. Give him some space. He'll come around. But Eleanor wasn't convinced. The warmth and understanding that had grown between them over the past few weeks seemed to have vanished overnight. That evening, unable to bear the tension any longer, Eleanor knocked on Ryan's office door. When he told her to enter, she stepped inside, her heart pounding. "Ryan, can we talk?" she asked, her voice calm but resolute. He looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" "I want to know if I've done something to upset you," Eleanor said, her hands clasped in front of her. "You've been distant all day, and I don't understand why." Ryan leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "Let me ask you something, Eleanor. Who were those men you were talking to last night?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. He had seen her? She struggled to find the right words, but her hesitation only fueled Ryan's suspicions. "Are they the reason you approached me in the first place?" Ryan continued, his tone sharp. "Did you think getting close to me would solve your problems?" Eleanor's jaw dropped, her shock quickly giving way to anger. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling. "You think I'm using you?" "What else am I supposed to think?" Ryan shot back, standing up. "I see you with two shady men, begging for more time to pay them back, and then I remember how conveniently you ended up in my life." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I can't believe you would think so little of me. After everything we've been through, this is what you believe." Ryan hesitated, his expression faltering for a moment, before hardening again. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Eleanor took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "You don't have to believe anything, Ryan. But you've shown me exactly what you think of me, and I'll never forget that." Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, the door closing behind her with a definitive thud. The aftermath of their confrontation left them both reeling. Eleanor spent the night replaying the argument in her mind, her heart heavy with disappointment and hurt. Ryan, meanwhile, couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at him. Had he been too quick to judge her? Was there more to the story than he realized? The next day, Derek noticed Ryan's unusual mood and decided to intervene. "You look like you didn't sleep at all," he said, placing a cup of coffee on Ryan's desk. "Want to talk about it?" Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think I made a mistake, Derek. I accused Eleanor of something terrible. But now I'm not so sure I was right." Derek raised an eyebrow. "What did you accuse her of?" Ryan hesitated before explaining what he had seen and the doubts it had raised. When he finished, Derek shook his head. "Ryan, you've got it all wrong. Eleanor's not that kind of person. She's been struggling to pay off her mother's medical bills. Those men, they're probably loan sharks she turned to out of desperation." Ryan felt a pang of guilt. If what Derek said was true, he had not only misjudged Eleanor, but had also hurt someone who had shown him nothing but loyalty and kindness. Determined to make things right, Ryan began looking into Eleanor's situation more closely. He spoke to her co-workers, learning about the sacrifices she had made for her family. The more he uncovered, the more ashamed he felt for doubting her. But would Eleanor be willing to forgive him? The following morning was heavy with unspoken tension. Eleanor arrived at work early, determined to throw herself into her tasks and avoid Ryan altogether. She couldn't let his accusations break her. There was too much at stake. But every step into Nexus Innovations reminded her of the argument that had left her feeling exposed and betrayed. In Ryan's office, guilt weighed on him like a storm cloud. Despite his confident facade, his thoughts were a whirlwind. Derek's words from the previous day replayed in his mind. "She's been struggling to pay off her mother's medical bills. Those men? They're probably loan sharks she turned to out of desperation." Could he have been so wrong about Eleanor? As Ryan wrestled with his conscience, Derek took matters into his own hands. He had always been loyal to Ryan, but he also respected Eleanor's unwavering dedication. She wasn't someone who deserved to be judged without evidence. Derek made a few discreet inquiries, starting with a visit to the HR department. It wasn't hard to confirm that Eleanor's salary barely covered her expenses, let alone her mother's mounting medical bills. A quick conversation with Maddie, who was more than willing to vouch for her best friend, painted a picture of Eleanor's struggles. "She's been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders," Maddie explained, her voice tinged with frustration. "Do you know how much she sacrifices for her mom? The debt isn't her fault. She just ran out of options." Armed with the truth, Derek didn't hesitate to share his findings with Ryan. "She's not using you, Ryan. She's been doing everything she can to stay afloat. Those men, they're just sharks circling someone who's already drowning." Ryan clenched his jaw, his chest tightening as he listened. He had let his insecurities cloud his judgment, and now he had to face the consequences of his mistake. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. No amount of work could distract her from the sting of Ryan's words. When Maddie showed up unexpectedly, coffee in hand, Eleanor let out a tired sigh. "Please tell me you're not here to lecture me," Eleanor muttered, taking the cup. Maddie grinned, sliding into the chair across from her. "No lectures, just a little pep talk." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Not sure I'm in the mood for pep." "Well, too bad," Maddie said cheerfully, "because you need to hear this. You've been through hell and back, Eleanor. You've faced things most people can't even imagine. And yet, here you are, still standing, still fighting. Don't let one man's stupid assumptions take that away from you." Eleanor's eyes softened, a small smile breaking through her defenses. "Thanks, Maddie." "That's what I'm here for," Maddie said, squeezing her hand. "And don't worry. If he doesn't apologize, I'll make sure he regrets it." They both laughed, the tension easing just slightly. Later that afternoon, Ryan stood by his office window, watching the city bustle below. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock on the door. "Come in," he said, turning around. Derek entered, his expression firm. "You need to fix this, Ryan. You accused her without knowing the full story. And that's not who you are." Ryan nodded, a mix of regret and determination in his eyes. "You're right. I owe her an apology." With that, he headed to Eleanor's desk. She looked up, surprised to see him standing there. The usual confidence in his posture was replaced with something else, something vulnerable. "Eleanor," Ryan began, his voice low but steady. "Can we talk in private?" She hesitated, her heart pounding. Finally, she nodded and followed him to his office. As the door closed behind them, Ryan took a deep breath. "I need to apologize. I made assumptions about you that were unfair and completely unfounded. I overheard something I didn't understand, and instead of asking you about it, I let my doubts take over. That was wrong." Eleanor crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "Why would you think I'd do something like that, Ryan? Have I ever given you a reason to doubt me?" "No," he admitted, guilt etched on his face. "You've been nothing but honest and hard-working. I let my insecurities get the better of me. I'm sorry." Eleanor's gaze softened slightly, but the hurt lingered. "Words are easy, Ryan. Trust isn't." "I know," he said, his voice firm. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn yours back." Over the next few days, Ryan made a conscious effort to show Eleanor he was sincere. He lightened her workload, ensured she had the flexibility to visit her mother, and even left thoughtful notes on her desk. Small gestures to show he cared. Eleanor noticed the changes, but remained cautious. She appreciated his efforts, but wasn't ready to let her guard down completely. Trust, she reminded herself, had to be rebuilt, piece by piece. One evening, as they worked late on a project, Ryan broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor looked up, her expression curious. "What?" "Why didn't you tell me about the debt? About your mother's medical bills?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Because it's my problem to solve. I didn't want to be seen as weak or incapable. I've spent my whole life proving I can stand on my own." Ryan nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're not weak, Eleanor. You're one of the strongest people I know. But you don't have to carry everything alone." His words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face her struggles entirely on her own. The following days at Nexus Innovations were a quiet storm. Eleanor continued to focus on her work, though the emotional weight of her confrontation with Ryan lingered. She was determined to keep her professional demeanor intact, even as her personal life felt fractured. Ryan, on the other hand, embarked on a silent mission to prove his sincerity and repair the damage he'd caused. Ryan began with small, thoughtful actions. He noticed Eleanor's workload piling up and discreetly reassigned some of her tasks to other team members. He ensured she had time to visit her mother at the hospital, arranging flexible deadlines for her projects. He even replaced her favorite coffee mug, which had cracked, with an identical one, down to the intricate floral pattern she adored. These gestures didn't go unnoticed. Eleanor appreciated the efforts, but remained guarded. Trust wasn't something she could freely give again, not after what had happened. One evening, as she reviewed the company's quarterly reports, she found a handwritten note tucked between the pages. The note read, "Eleanor, your dedication doesn't go unnoticed. I hope these adjustments make things a little easier for you. Let me know if there's anything else I can do. Ryan." She stared at the note for a moment, her emotions conflicted. It was a kind gesture, but it didn't erase the hurt. Still, a part of her couldn't help but feel a glimmer of appreciation. Later that week, Eleanor visited her mother, Margaret, at the hospital. Margaret had been steadily recovering, and her sharp wit remained intact. As Eleanor recounted her week, Margaret noticed her hesitation whenever Ryan's name came up. "Something's bothering you," Margaret said, her tone gentle but probing. "What is it?" Eleanor sighed, sitting by her mother's bedside. "It's Ryan. He made some assumptions about me, hurtful ones, but now he's trying to make amends." Margaret raised an eyebrow. And I don't know if I can forgive him," Eleanor admitted. "Part of me wants to, but another part is still angry." Margaret reached out, taking her daughter's hand. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, sweetheart. It's about letting go of the anger for your own peace. If he's genuinely trying, maybe it's worth considering." Eleanor nodded, her mother's words sinking in. She wasn't ready to let go completely, but she began to wonder if holding on to her anger was doing more harm than good. The next day, Ryan decided it was time to take a more direct approach. He found Eleanor in the break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Do you have a minute?" Ryan asked, his tone tentative. Eleanor hesitated but nodded. "Sure." They moved to a quiet corner of the office, away from prying eyes. Ryan took a deep breath before speaking. "I know I've apologized, but I need to say it again. I was wrong, Eleanor. I let my insecurities cloud my judgment, and I hurt you in the process. I'm truly sorry." Eleanor studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. "Ryan, I appreciate your apology, but trust isn't something that comes back overnight. It's earned." "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it." Eleanor nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Then show me, Ryan. Actions speak louder than words." In the days that followed, Ryan's actions spoke volumes. He began involving Eleanor in more high-level meetings, valuing her input and acknowledging her expertise. During one particularly intense brainstorming session, he publicly praised her for an innovative idea, silencing any lingering doubts from their colleagues about her abilities. At the same time, he made an effort to connect on a personal level. One afternoon, he invited her to join him for lunch at a nearby cafe. Eleanor hesitated but agreed, curious about his intentions. As they sat on the patio, the conversation shifted from work to more personal topics. Ryan shared stories from his childhood, moments of loneliness, and the pressures of growing up in a family obsessed with success. "I guess I've always had this fear of being used," Ryan admitted, his voice quiet. "It's made me put up walls, even when I shouldn't." Eleanor listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "I understand fear, Ryan, but you can't let it dictate your actions. Trust is a risk, but it's worth taking." Her words struck a chord, and Ryan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You're right. I just hope I can prove that I'm worth trusting." The breakthrough came during a company-wide presentation. Eleanor had been instrumental in preparing the materials, but when Ryan's laptop crashed minutes before the presentation, she stepped in without hesitation. She connected her own device, salvaged the slides, and confidently delivered the opening remarks. The room erupted in applause, and Ryan couldn't hide his pride. As the crowd dispersed, he approached Eleanor, his gratitude evident. "You were incredible," he said, his smile genuine. "Thank you for saving the day." Eleanor shrugged, a faint smile on her lips. "Just doing my job." "No," Ryan said, his tone serious. "You went above and beyond. I owe you more than I can say." For the first time, Eleanor felt a shift in their dynamic. The tension was still there, but it was accompanied by something else, something that felt like the beginning of healing. That evening, Ryan invited Eleanor to the rooftop garden of the building. The city lights sparkled below, creating a serene atmosphere. Eleanor hesitated but joined him, curious about his intentions. "I wanted to thank you," Ryan said, handing her a small bouquet of wildflowers, "for everything, for your patience, your strength, and for not giving up on me." Eleanor accepted the flowers, her heart softening. "Ryan, I'm not sure where this will go, but I'm willing to take it one step at a time." "That's all I can ask for," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. As they stood under the stars, a tentative understanding began to form. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start. And for both of them, it was enough. Tension hung thick in the air at Nexus Innovations. While Eleanor had started to feel a glimmer of hope in her professional and personal rapport with Ryan, she couldn't ignore the subtle whispers and sidelong glances that followed her through the office. Her colleagues, emboldened by rumors, had begun to speculate about her relationship with the CEO, Ryan Harper. Amy Foster, a senior project manager with a knack for stirring trouble, had been particularly vocal. "It's no surprise she's getting all the plum assignments," Amy remarked loudly in the break room. "Sleeping your way to the top is such a cliché. But hey, if it works." Eleanor, walking in just in time to hear the comment, froze. She could feel every eye in the room turning toward her. For a moment, she considered walking away, but her instincts told her otherwise. Setting down her coffee mug with a deliberate clink, she turned to face Amy. "Do you have something you'd like to say to me directly, Amy?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady but firm. Amy hesitated for a moment before smirking. "I'm just making an observation. We all see how cozy you are with Mr. Harper." Before Eleanor could respond, the room fell silent as Ryan walked in. His sharp gaze scanned the room, instantly understanding the situation. "Is there a problem here?" Ryan asked, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Amy faltered, her smirk vanishing. "No, sir. Just a casual conversation." Ryan's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he turned to Eleanor. "Ms. Brooks, can you step into my office? I'd like to discuss the presentation for tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, following him out. Behind them, the break room remained silent, the tension palpable. In Ryan's office, Eleanor took a seat, crossing her arms defensively. "You didn't need to intervene," she said before he could speak. Ryan leaned against his desk, studying her. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, but I couldn't stand there and let someone undermine your work. You don't deserve that." "I can handle Amy," Eleanor replied, though her voice softened. "But this is exactly why I was hesitant about us." Ryan's expression shifted to one of regret. "I understand, and I'm sorry for putting you in this position, but I won't tolerate anyone questioning your professionalism. You've earned your place here." Eleanor sighed, appreciating his support, but still wary of the situation. "Then let me handle it. If I let you fight my battles, it'll only make things worse." Ryan nodded. "All right. But if it escalates, promise me you'll let me know." Eleanor hesitated, but eventually agreed. "Fine. Now, about that presentation." The following day, the tension came to a head during a staff meeting. Ryan stood at the head of the conference room, outlining the company's strategic goals for the next quarter. Eleanor sat near the center, jotting down notes, while ignoring the pointed looks from Amy. As Ryan opened the floor for questions, Amy raised her hand. "I have a concern, Mr. Harper," she began, her tone laced with false politeness. "I think it's important for all employees to have equal opportunities, especially when it comes to contributing to key projects. It seems some people are being favored. The room fell silent, all eyes darting between Amy and Eleanor. Eleanor's grip tightened on her pen, her stomach churning. Ryan's gaze hardened. Miss Foster, are you suggesting that I'm not impartial in my management decisions? Amy hesitated but pressed on. I'm simply saying that appearances matter, sir. Favoritism can undermine morale. Ryan straightened, his voice calm but resolute. Let me make something very clear. Every decision I make is based on merit. Miss Brooks has consistently demonstrated exceptional skill and dedication, which is why she's entrusted with high-level responsibilities. If anyone feels otherwise, I encourage them to review her work and come to me with specific concerns. Otherwise, I expect professional behavior from everyone in this company. Amy's face reddened, and she muttered a quick, "Understood," before sinking back into her chair. Eleanor, though still tense, felt a wave of relief wash over her. After the meeting, Eleanor lingered in the conference room, reviewing her notes. Ryan approached, his expression softer now. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Eleanor replied, though her voice was quieter than usual. "Thank you for defending me." "You didn't need defending," Ryan said. "Your work speaks for itself. I just wanted to make sure everyone else knows that too." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Still, I appreciate it. But you don't have to go out of your way for me." "I'm not going out of my way," Ryan said, his tone sincere. "I'm just doing what's right." The incident with Amy marked a turning point for Eleanor. She realized that while Ryan's support was invaluable, she also needed to take control of her narrative. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into her work, letting her accomplishments speak louder than any rumors. Eleanor also began building stronger relationships with her colleagues, finding allies in unexpected places. Maddie, ever the optimist, encouraged her to focus on those who valued her contributions rather than the naysayers. "You can't control what people say," Maddie told her over lunch, "but you can show them they're wrong." Despite the challenges, Eleanor and Ryan's bond continued to deepen. They found moments of solace amid the chaos, shared coffee breaks, quiet conversations after hours, and stolen glances that spoke volumes. Eleanor still wrestled with her fears of being judged, but Ryan's unwavering belief in her gave her strength. One evening, as they worked late on a critical proposal, Ryan paused to look at Eleanor. "You're incredible, you know that?" Eleanor glanced up, surprised. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Ryan said, shaking his head. "You're doing more than that. You're proving that you're stronger than anyone here gives you credit for, including me." Eleanor's heart swelled, but she kept her response measured. "Thank you, Ryan. That means a lot." As time passed, Eleanor's determination began to pay off. Her colleagues started to see her not as someone benefiting from favoritism, but as a talented and driven professional. Even Amy, though still icy, refrained from making further comments. By the end of the quarter, Eleanor had solidified her position as a respected member of the team. She still faced challenges, but she tackled them with confidence, knowing that she had earned her place. The days after the confrontation in the staff meeting were quieter, but Eleanor knew the rumors hadn't entirely died down. Though Amy Foster had retreated into silence, the subtle glances and whispered conversations still persisted. Eleanor, however, resolved not to let them derail her focus. She had fought too hard to reach this point, to let baseless speculation diminish her achievements. But one thing weighed on her mind: the tension between her and Ryan. Their professional relationship was strong, but the lines were increasingly blurred by moments of vulnerability and gestures of care that hinted at something deeper. Late one evening, Eleanor sat at her desk, absorbed in preparing a report for an upcoming board meeting. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maddie. Maddie, hey, heard a crazy rumor. Did Ryan pay off your debt? Tell me it's not true. Call me. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Her heart raced as she reread the text, unsure how Maddie could have possibly known. She quickly stood and made her way to Ryan's office. It was late, and most of the staff had gone home, but a faint light emanated from under his door. Eleanor knocked once before entering. Ryan looked up from his desk, surprised by her sudden appearance. Eleanor, everything okay? She closed the door and walked toward him, her expression tense. Ryan, we need to talk. Ryan set down his pen, his brows knitting together. What's wrong? Did you pay off my debt? Eleanor's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the storm of emotions she felt. Ryan hesitated, his silence confirming her suspicion. Yes, he admitted after a moment. I did. Eleanor's breath hitched. Why would you do that without telling me? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to find out this way? I didn't do it to humiliate you, Ryan said, standing. I did it because I care about you, Eleanor. Those men were a threat, and I couldn't stand by knowing they might harm you or your mother. But it wasn't your decision to make, Eleanor exclaimed, her voice rising. I was handling it. Were you? Ryan asked, his tone firm but not unkind. Eleanor, I saw how much stress you were under. You don't have to do everything alone. That's not the point, she replied, tears welling in her eyes. I've spent my whole life proving I can stand on my own. And now, you've made me feel like I can't. Ryan took a step closer, his voice softening. I didn't mean to take away your independence. I just wanted to help. I see how much you give to everyone around you, and I wanted to give something back. Eleanor wiped at her eyes, trying to regain composure. I appreciate what you were trying to do, but I need to know that you trust me to handle my own life. Ryan nodded, regret etched on his face. I do trust you, Eleanor. I didn't think it through. I'm sorry. The room fell into a heavy silence. Finally, Ryan broke it, his voice barely above a whisper. You've changed my life, Eleanor. Before I met you, everything was about work and appearances. You've made me see things differently. About myself. About what I want. Eleanor looked at him, her anger slowly giving way to something more complicated. Ryan, I know I've made mistakes, he continued, his eyes searching hers. But I'm not just trying to fix this because I feel guilty. I'm doing it because I care about you. I don't want to lose what we have. Whatever this is. Eleanor's walls began to crumble. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Ryan, I don't know if I can trust this. Trust us. But I can't deny that I feel something for you too. The space between them seemed to disappear as Ryan reached for her hand. Then let's figure it out together. Before she could overthink it, Eleanor leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was as if weeks of tension and unspoken emotions had finally found release. When they pulled away, Eleanor looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of vulnerability and determination. But this doesn't mean everything's fixed. I still need my independence. And I wouldn't want it any other way, Ryan replied, a small smile playing at his lips. Over the following days, Eleanor found herself navigating a delicate balance between maintaining her autonomy and allowing herself to trust Ryan. True to his word, Ryan respected her boundaries, focusing on small gestures of support rather than grand interventions. One afternoon, he stopped by her desk with a cup of her favorite tea. I figured you could use this, he said casually. Eleanor smiled despite herself. Thanks, but don't think this means you're off the hook. Ryan chuckled. Wouldn't dream of it. Meanwhile, though, the office atmosphere began to shift. The confrontation with Amy had silenced the more overt criticisms, but subtle tensions remained. Determined to prove herself, Eleanor threw herself into her work, exceeding expectations at every turn. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. During a leadership meeting, Ryan highlighted one of her proposals as a model of innovation and creativity. This is the kind of thinking that sets us apart, he said, glancing briefly at Eleanor with a look of pride. Later, Derek approached Eleanor in the break room. You've really turned things around, he said, handing her a coffee. Even Amy seems to be biting her tongue. Eleanor smirked. I'll believe that when I see it. One evening, as they worked late on a major project, Ryan looked at Eleanor across the conference table. You know, I've never met anyone like you. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment or a warning? Definitely a compliment, Ryan said with a smile. You challenge me in ways no one else has, and honestly, I like it. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, but kept her tone light. Good, because I'm not planning on making it easy for you. Ryan laughed, the sound genuine and carefree. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt a sense of peace. The first rays of dawn lit up the bustling streets of Chicago as Eleanor arrived at the office, coffee in hand. She had been finding solace in the quiet early mornings, a time when the world seemed less complicated. Though the tension between her and Ryan had eased, she still felt the weight of balancing her independence with the growing closeness between them. Ryan, ever observant, had noticed her early arrivals. That morning, he decided to join her. As Eleanor flipped through her agenda, she was startled by his voice. Early start, as usual? She glanced up to see Ryan standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. You're one to talk, she replied, smiling faintly. Ryan entered, placing 1 cup on her desk. Thought you might like a change from your usual. Eleanor took a sip and raised an eyebrow. Hazelnut? Bold choice. He chuckled. I figured you'd appreciate the risk. Later that week, Ryan surprised Eleanor with a request. I want you to join me at a vineyard retreat this weekend, he said, during a brief meeting in his office. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. A vineyard retreat? For what? For clarity, Ryan replied with a small smile. Sometimes stepping away from the chaos helps us see things differently. Besides, it's a partnership-building event. We can discuss some company strategies in a more relaxed setting. Reluctant but intrigued, Eleanor agreed. That Saturday, Ryan picked her up in his sleek black car. The drive out of the city was tranquil, with rolling green hills gradually replacing the urban skyline. Eleanor found herself unwinding as Ryan shared anecdotes from his childhood, a stark contrast to the polished CEO image she had grown accustomed to. When they arrived, the vineyard was more breathtaking than Eleanor imagined. Rows of grapevines stretched endlessly under a golden sunset. A reserved table awaited them on the terrace, adorned with candles and fresh flowers. This place is stunning, Eleanor admitted, taking in the scenery. Ryan gestured toward the table. I thought you might like it. It's one of my favorite places to think. As they dined, their conversation drifted from work to personal aspirations. Eleanor confessed her dream of opening her own creative agency, while Ryan shared his vision of transforming Nexus Innovations into a global leader in ethical AI. The vulnerability in their words created a newfound connection. After dinner, they strolled through the vineyard. Ryan paused near a secluded gazebo, turning to face Eleanor. You've taught me something important, he began. That vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. I've always been so focused on controlling every aspect of my life. But with you, I'm learning to let go. Eleanor felt her heart stir. You're not the only one learning, Ryan. I've always been so scared of depending on anyone. But you've shown me that trust doesn't mean losing myself. Their conversation felt like a turning point, a mutual acknowledgement of how far they had come. As the evening breeze brushed past them, Ryan reached for her hand. They walked back in comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between them stronger than ever. Returning to the office on Monday, Eleanor was greeted with a packed schedule. A high-profile client presentation loomed, and the team was under immense pressure to deliver. Ryan, noticing her exhaustion, decided to step in. During a late-night prep session, Ryan brought Eleanor a cup of her favorite tea. "You've been working non-stop," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Let me help." Eleanor hesitated, but eventually nodded. They worked side by side, their synergy apparent as they fine-tuned every detail of the presentation. By the time they finished, it was well past midnight. "You know," Eleanor said, leaning back in her chair, "you're not terrible at this whole teamwork thing." Ryan smirked. "High praise coming from you." Amidst the chaos of work, Eleanor made time to visit her mother. Margaret had been recovering well, her spirits lifted by Ryan's frequent visits. That evening, Ryan joined Eleanor at the hospital, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, Margaret's favorite. "Ryan, you're spoiling me," Margaret teased, accepting the flowers with a smile. "Just trying to keep up with your daughter," he replied, earning a chuckle from both women. As the evening wore on, Margaret shared stories from Eleanor's childhood, painting a picture of resilience and determination. Ryan listened intently, his admiration for Eleanor growing with every word. The following weekend, Ryan invited Eleanor to his penthouse for dinner. The ambiance was warm and intimate, a departure from the corporate world they inhabited daily. Over a simple but delicious meal, Ryan broached a sensitive topic. "I've been thinking about our dynamic," he began. "I don't want my actions to ever make you feel diminished. I want us to be equals, in work and in life." Eleanor set down her fork, meeting his gaze. "Ryan, I've been thinking about that too. I've realized that leaning on someone doesn't make me weak, but I need to know that my independence is respected." "Always," Ryan assured her. "You're one of the strongest people I know, Eleanor. I'm here to support you, not to take over." The conversation solidified their understanding of each other. For the first time, Eleanor felt like they were truly on the same page. By the end of the chapter, Eleanor and Ryan had made significant strides in their relationship. Their time at the vineyard, coupled with their candid conversations, had brought them closer. They were learning to navigate the complexities of their connection while maintaining their individuality. Eleanor, reflecting on their journey, realized that while the road ahead was still uncertain, she was ready to face it, with Ryan by her side. As for Ryan, he was more determined than ever to prove that love, when built on trust and respect, could withstand anything. Eleanor woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She fumbled for it, groggy but alert, and saw the name of her mother's doctor flashing on the screen. Her heart raced as she answered, bracing for news. "Miss Brooks, I'm pleased to inform you that Margaret's health has improved significantly. She can be discharged in a few days," the doctor said, his voice warm with reassurance. Eleanor exhaled deeply, tears welling in her eyes. Relief washed over her, and she immediately called Ryan to share the news. "Ryan, she's coming home," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with emotion. "That's incredible," Ryan replied. "Let's make it a special day for her." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Eleanor prepared for her mother's return. Ryan offered his help at every turn, from arranging for a hospital bed at home to ensuring Margaret's favorite tea set was polished and ready. "You don't have to do all this," Eleanor said, as they carried groceries into her apartment. "I want to," Ryan replied simply. "Margaret's happiness matters to me because it matters to you." Eleanor paused, touched by his sincerity. "Thank you, Ryan. Really." The day finally arrived. Ryan drove Eleanor to the hospital, and together they escorted Margaret home. Margaret, her face lit with joy, held Eleanor's hand tightly. When they arrived, Margaret was greeted by a beautifully arranged living room. Sunflowers adorned the table, and a cozy armchair sat near the window where she loved to read. "Oh, you've outdone yourselves," Margaret said, tears shining in her eyes. "I feel like royalty." "You deserve it," Ryan said warmly. As Margaret settled in, Ryan prepared tea while Eleanor adjusted her mother's pillows. The moment felt perfect, a rare blend of peace and joy that Eleanor hadn't experienced in years. That evening, Margaret and Eleanor sat together, catching up on everything they had missed. Margaret's eyes twinkled as she brought up Ryan. "He's quite the man, isn't he?" Eleanor blushed. "He is. He's been incredible through all of this." Margaret leaned closer. "You're lucky to have found someone like him. But remember, he's lucky to have you too." Eleanor smiled, her heart full. Margaret's blessing meant more to her than she could express. A week later, Ryan surprised Eleanor with an invitation. "Take the weekend off," he said. "I have something planned." Curiosity piqued, Eleanor agreed. Ryan drove them to a secluded beach just outside the city. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the sand. A wooden gazebo stood nearby, decorated with soft lights and fresh flowers. "What's all this?" Eleanor asked, breathless at the sight. "You'll see," Ryan said, leading her to a candlelit table. They enjoyed a quiet dinner, talking about everything from work to their dreams for the future. As the meal ended, Ryan stood, reaching into his pocket. "Eleanor," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Meeting you was the most unexpected blessing of my life. You've taught me how to love, how to trust, and how to be vulnerable. I can't imagine a future without you." He knelt, holding out a delicate ring. "Will you marry me?" Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Ryan. 1,000 times, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the world seemed to fade away. They kissed under the twinkling lights, the waves providing a gentle soundtrack to their perfect moment. The following morning, Eleanor and Ryan visited Margaret to share the news. Margaret's joy was palpable. "Oh, Eleanor, I knew he was the one," she said, pulling her daughter into a hug. Ryan knelt beside Margaret, holding her hand. "Thank you for raising an extraordinary woman. I promise to love and support her always." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You better, young man," she said with a teasing smile. "Or you'll have to answer to me." Eleanor and Ryan's engagement brought a mix of excitement and new challenges. Balancing their personal relationship with their professional roles at Nexus Innovations was no small feat. While their connection deepened with each passing day, whispers and speculation at the office began to grow louder. "Did you see the ring on Eleanor's finger?" Amy Foster whispered to another colleague in the break room. "I bet she's getting special treatment now." Eleanor overheard the comment as she passed by, but kept her head high. She had anticipated this reaction and decided to let her work speak for itself. Ryan, however, wasn't as calm about the rumors. In a private meeting with his senior staff, He addressed the issue directly. "I expect professionalism and respect in this workplace," he said firmly. "Eleanor's position is based solely on her skills and dedication. Personal relationships should never overshadow that." His tone left no room for debate, but Eleanor knew the rumors wouldn't die easily. Despite the office drama, wedding preparations moved forward. Eleanor, with Maddie's enthusiastic help, began organizing the details. The venue was set, a picturesque vineyard outside Chicago, surrounded by rolling hills and lush greenery. The guest list was small, intimate, and carefully curated. Maddie burst into Eleanor's apartment one evening, her arms full of bridal magazines. "We need to find you the perfect dress," she declared. "And I won't take no for an answer." Eleanor laughed, grateful for her friend's support. "You're more excited than I am." "Of course I am. This is your big day," Maddie replied, flipping through pages of gowns. "You deserve to feel like the queen you are." As the wedding date approached, an unexpected complication arose. Vanessa Moore, Ryan's ex-girlfriend, reappeared. She strolled into Nexus Innovations one afternoon, under the pretense of discussing a potential partnership. Her presence was impossible to ignore, her confidence as sharp as ever. "Ryan, darling," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with familiarity. "I heard the news. Congratulations." Ryan's smile was polite, but distant. "Thank you, Vanessa. I'm surprised to see you here." "Oh, I couldn't resist stopping by," she said, her eyes flickering toward Eleanor's desk. "I see you've chosen someone unique." Eleanor, who had been typing furiously, froze at the comment, but quickly resumed her work. She refused to give Vanessa the satisfaction of a reaction. Later that evening, Ryan brought up the encounter. "I'm sorry about Vanessa," he said, as they sat together on Eleanor's couch. "She has a way of stirring up trouble." "I'm not worried about her," Eleanor replied firmly. "I trust you, and that's what matters." Her words eased Ryan's tension, but he remained wary of Vanessa's motives. As the wedding neared, Ryan and Eleanor faced another hurdle: blending their families. Ryan's parents, who lived in New York, were initially skeptical of their whirlwind romance. His mother, Charlotte Harper, insisted on meeting Eleanor before the wedding. "I just want to make sure she's the right fit for you," Charlotte said during a phone call. Ryan rolled his eyes, but agreed to a dinner. Eleanor, nervous but determined, prepared for the meeting. Maddie coached her beforehand. "Be yourself," she advised. "You've already won Ryan's heart, and that's what matters." The dinner was formal, but cordial. Charlotte asked pointed questions about Eleanor's background and future plans, but Eleanor answered with poise. By the end of the evening, Charlotte's demeanor softened. "I can see why Ryan admires you," she said, as they said their goodbyes. "You're a strong woman." Eleanor exhaled in relief once they left. That was intense. "You were perfect," Ryan assured her, squeezing her hand. Days before the wedding, a problem arose. The florist for the event canceled unexpectedly. Eleanor panicked, but Ryan stepped in. "We'll figure this out," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. With Maddie's help, they found a new florist who could work on short notice. "This isn't just about flowers," Eleanor admitted to Ryan that evening. "It's about everything feeling perfect for once." Ryan kissed her forehead. "It will be, Eleanor, because it's us." On the eve of the wedding, Ryan surprised Eleanor with a heartfelt letter. Delivered by Maddie, the letter read, "Eleanor, from the moment you sat at the wrong table, my life changed in ways I never imagined. You've shown me what it means to love deeply and without reservation. Tomorrow, I get to call you my wife, and that's the greatest gift I could ever receive. I promise to love and cherish you every single day." Eleanor cried as she read the letter, her heart full of gratitude and love. The night before the wedding, Eleanor stayed with Maddie to honor the tradition of not seeing the groom before the ceremony. They shared laughs and memories, and Maddie toasted to her best friend. "To the smartest, strongest, and most beautiful bride, you deserve all the happiness in the world." Eleanor smiled, knowing that the life waiting for her with Ryan was everything she had ever hoped for, and more. The morning sunlight poured through the windows of the vineyard estate, casting a golden glow on the preparations for the wedding. Eleanor stood before a tall mirror in a private suite, the lace detailing of her white gown shimmering as Maddie fussed with the train. "You look like you just walked out of a fairy tale," Maddie said, her voice brimming with emotion. "Ryan's going to lose it when he sees you." Eleanor smiled, but her nerves were evident in the way she clutched her bouquet. "I still can't believe this is happening. A year ago, I was just trying to survive work and take care of Mom. Now, I'm about to marry the man who changed everything." Margaret, seated in a chair nearby, adjusted the soft scarf around her neck. Her health had improved significantly, and her radiant smile said more than words could. "You deserve this happiness, sweetheart. And Ryan? He's the real deal. I couldn't have chosen better myself." Outside, the vineyard buzzed with excitement. Guests began to arrive, mingling under the large canopy, draped in soft white fabric and decorated with fresh flowers. Ryan, standing near the altar, adjusted his cufflinks as Derek handed him a glass of water. "You nervous?" Derek asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not nervous," Ryan replied with a grin. "Just ready." "Good answer," Derek said, patting him on the shoulder. "Though, I think that half the staff is here, just to see if you'll trip on the way to the altar." Ryan chuckled, but his focus shifted as he caught sight of Charlotte Harper, his mother, walking toward him. She was dressed elegantly, her expression softened by pride. "You've done well, Ryan," she said, her voice steady. "Eleanor is everything I hoped you'd find, and more." "Thanks, Mom," Ryan replied, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. As the music began, the chatter among the guests quieted. Ryan took his place at the altar, his heart pounding in anticipation. He barely noticed the procession of bridesmaids and groomsmen until Maddie appeared, giving him a playful wink before taking her place. Then came Eleanor. The sight of her took Ryan's breath away. Her gown flowed like liquid sunlight, and her eyes, filled with a mixture of love and excitement, locked onto his. She walked down the aisle on the arm of Margaret, whose strength and pride were evident in every step. When Eleanor reached him, the world seemed to fade away. "You look stunning," Ryan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And you look like you're about to cry," Eleanor teased, though her own tears glistened. The officiant began the ceremony, weaving their journey into the vows. When it was time to speak, Ryan took Eleanor's hands and said, "Eleanor, you taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up, even when things are hard. I promise to be by your side, to lift you up, and to love you for who you are, every single day." Eleanor's voice trembled as she replied, "Ryan, you came into my life when I wasn't even looking, and yet you've become the person I can't imagine my life without. I promise to love you with my whole heart and to build a life with you, one filled with trust, laughter, and endless support." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, their kiss was met with thunderous applause and cheers. The reception was a lively celebration. Under the twinkling fairy lights, Ryan and Eleanor shared their first dance to a soft melody that seemed to capture their entire journey. Guests clapped and swayed as Maddie and Derek took over the dance floor, their antics drawing laughter from everyone. At the head table, Margaret leaned toward Charlotte. "You and I both know they're going to be just fine," she said with a knowing smile. Charlotte nodded, her earlier doubts completely erased. Yes, they've found what so many people spend their whole lives searching for. As the night continued, Ryan surprised Eleanor with a slideshow of moments they'd shared. From the gala to quiet nights working late, and even a candid shot of her laughing while eating a slice of Bentley's birthday cake. The last slide read, "Here's to forever." Eleanor wiped away a tear as Ryan took her hand. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. "I wanted to," Ryan replied. "Every moment with you is worth celebrating." Months later, Eleanor and Ryan settled into their life together. The balance between work and home wasn't always easy, but they approached every challenge as a team. Eleanor continued to excel at Nexus Innovations, now leading a project that merged her creativity with Ryan's business acumen. Margaret, now in remission, often visited their home, which was filled with laughter, love, and the occasional mischief from Bentley, who had fully embraced his role as the family mascot. One evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset, Ryan turned to Eleanor. "Do you ever think about how crazy it is that we met by accident?" Eleanor smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Not an accident, fate." Their hands intertwined. They sat in comfortable silence, knowing that their story, filled with unexpected twists, moments of doubt, and undeniable love, was only just beginning. As Eleanor and Ryan's journey comes to a beautiful close, we're left with a story that reminds us all about the power of love, resilience, and second chances. But what do you think? Would you have forgiven Ryan after everything? Or do you believe Eleanor's patience and strength were what truly held their story together? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your take on their journey might just inspire our next tale. And if this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll never miss another unforgettable love story. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. Get ready, because the next chapter of love, drama, and unexpected twist is coming soon. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss it. Love.